After Gia was whisked away into Mitchell's bedroom and vanished for months, she finally reappears, but this time she's left the city and is on an exciting trip abroad. She's loving the fresh breeze of foreign air and the change of scenery. Most of all, she's thrilled to share this experience with her Chad husband, Mel, and her parents, who are having the time of their lives fishing without her. How fun for them. But how did Gia end up in this situation? It all started when Gia got a notification reminding her that her dad's 60th birthday was coming up. When she mentioned it to Mitchell, he thought it was a big deal. Gia, on the other hand, was unconcerned. Her dad had told her not to worry about it. Who even celebrates their 60th birthday these days, she had thought. But when she brought it up with her sister asked if Gia was an idiot. Who actually takes Dad at face value like that? Naturally, Gia insisted she never believed it, but we all know the truth. Then, out of the blue, Gia got a call from Mitchell's mum, inviting her on a trip abroad. Gia was confused at first, but Mitchell's mum explained that she had won the trip in a golfing competition. Looks like Mel isn't the only Chad in the family. Before long, they were all on a flight headed to their exotic destination, and everyone was having a blast at the beach. Well, everyone except Gia. That brings us to the present. Gia's dad is in his element, reeling in a huge catch, practically glowing with joy. Gia's parents are endlessly grateful to Mel for spoiling them with this trip, asking him to send their thanks to his family. Mel assures them he will. Everything seems perfect, until Mitchell notices Gia sitting off to the side, arms crossed, clearly uninterested in the whole thing. Mitchell notices Gia's sour mood and asks why she's angry. Gia immediately snaps back, asking what he's talking about, as if he's the one being ridiculous. Mitchell explains that Gia looks like she's sprouting horns with the expression she's wearing. But Gia, still avoiding the issue, brushes it off and asks Mel to explain further. Mitchell, reading between the lines, assumes Gia's just upset. Gia denies it, saying it's way more complicated than that. Too hard to put into words. To name a few reasons, she doesn't like being on a trip with her parents, she hates fishing, she's just gotten off a long flight, and, to top it off, she's seasick. Seeing this, Mitchell decides to think fast. Using his extensive knowledge of all things Gia, he devises a plan to lift her mood. He starts by asking Gia if she wants to see something cool. Confused, Gia nods. Mitchell folds his hands and tells her to look closely, warning that it might be hard to see. Gia, curious but skeptical, leans in to inspect his hands, trying to figure out what he's up to. Suddenly, Mitchell catches her off guard by leaning in and planting a quick kiss on her lips. Gia's so startled that she yells at him, smacking him on the back of the neck in embarrassment. But Mitchell has already braced himself for her reaction, ready for whatever she throws his way. To make things worse, Gia's parents start teasing her, implying she's in a physically active relationship, if you catch their drift. Flustered, Gia denies everything, frantically asking Mitchell why he'd do something like that out of the blue. Mitchell, a bit confused, asks if Gia didn't like it, trying to justify his spontaneous kiss by explaining his reasoning. But as he continues, it dawns on him that Gia actually hated it. Now, disappointment washes over him as he realizes his efforts to cheer her up have only made things worse. Seeing Mitchell's reaction, Gia is at a loss for words. Deep in thought, she knows Mitchell is sly like a wolf, and he's framed the situation in such a way that she can't easily dodge his question. Instead of answering, Gia places her hands on Mitchell's shoulders and leans in, bringing them face to face. Just as their lips are about to meet, the ship's captain yells out that a big wave is incoming, urgently commanding everyone to take cover for their safety. But safety is the last thing on Gia's mind. The captain just ruined the mood, and surely the wave can't be that big, right? Gia and Mitchell turn around, only to be met by the sight of a massive wave, towering many times higher than their boat. They're both speechless. Mitchell instinctively tries to shield Gia, but the sheer force of the wave hurls them both into the ocean. In an eerie reflection of the start of her vacation, the sun is still shining and Gia, now adrift, is enjoying the freedom from the suffocating city life. perhaps a bit too much freedom this time. Weeks pass, and Gia has been stranded on a remote island. One day, while sitting alone, Gia hears her name being called. To her surprise, it's Mitchell, returning from a fishing trip, dressed in a stylish, almost absurdly fashionable outfit. He's laughing and in high spirits, as if he's living the perfect island life. Though relieved to see him, Gia can't help but wonder how they ended up in this bizarre situation. After the wave sank the ship, Gia washed up on the shore of this remote island, surviving only because she'd been wearing a life vest. When she first woke up, disoriented and alone, she panicked. Seeing Mitchell's glasses next to her but no sign of him, she feared the worst. In a fit of emotion, she screamed out his name, thinking she was sending him off into the afterlife. Little did she know, Mitchell was right behind her the entire time, alive and well. Concerned by Gia's behavior, he asks her what's going on. Shocked to see him, Gia tries to play it cool and act like nothing happened, despite Mitchell having witnessed the whole scene. Mel calmly explains the situation to Gia. He also woke up on this island after the shipwreck, and as far as he knows, Gia is the only other person within 500 meters. At first, Gia thinks it's fine since they're both safe, but then a horrifying realization strikes her. Her parents are missing. Panic rising, Gia desperately asks Mel if he's seen them. His silence and expression say it all. Gia's heart sinks. She collapses to the ground, overwhelmed by the thought of her parents being gone. She blames herself, thinking that if she had convinced them not to go on this trip, none of this would have happened. But despite her despair, she clings to hope, insisting they'll search the entire island together to find them. Mitchell, however, knows Gia isn't thinking clearly. He calls out her full name in an attempt to snap her out of it, but she's too focused on finding her parents. Defensive and frantic, she refuses to listen. Desperate to calm her down, Mitchell quickly forces something into her mouth. Gia has an immediate, intense reaction, gagging and trying to spit out the disgusting taste. She starts pouting, demanding to know what he just gave her. Mitchell nonchalantly explains that it's saponin, a bitter bioactive compound found in many plants, known for its sterilizing properties. Gia rolls her eyes, frustrated, and says she doesn't care about the science. She just wants to know what she ate. Ignoring her complaints, Mitchell grabs her face and checks to see if the panic has subsided. Relieved to see that Gia has returned to her normal self, he tells her to calm down. He reassures her that while she's worried about her parents, her fears aren't reality. If they landed safely, the others should be okay too. Gia thinks about it and reluctantly agrees, though she's annoyed that Mitchell is treating her like a child. But despite everything, she manages to smile, feeling a bit more at ease in the situation. Gia can't deny that Mitchell's approach is working. She starts to wonder if having someone comfort her without words has always been this therapeutic. As Mitchell inspects her ear, he suddenly asks what happened to it. Gia, confused, asks what he means. Mitchell explains that something seems off. Her ear feels colder than usual. Gia brushes it off, saying it's probably just because she was in the water, but Mitchell doesn't buy it. He's convinced her ear temperature is dangerously low, and insists it needs to be warmed up immediately. Panicked, Mitchell places his hands over Gia's ears and declares that if her temperature stays low in this heat, she's in danger. Gia, still confused, tries to process what he's saying. Mitchell, growing more urgent, yells that she could die if they don't fix this fast. The seriousness finally sinks in, and Gia stomps her feet, anxiously asking what she should do to stay alive. Mitchell explains that they're both in bad shape from being in the water for so long. The first step to warming up is getting out of their wet clothes, as the damp fabric is making them colder. Hearing this, Gia suddenly realizes the severity of the situation. She recalls the #1 rule in disaster survival: maintain body temperature. To do that, you need to find a heat source, stay dry, and, if necessary, share body heat with others. That thought brings Gia to the only logical conclusion. The best way to stay warm is to share body heat with Mel. She's prepared for this and, truthfully, a little excited at the prospect. But Mitchell has other plans. Instead of getting cozy, Mitchell instructs Gia to lie down on a large rock under the sun, where she'll absorb maximum heat. Reluctantly, Gia complies. As she lies there, feeling the sun's rays beating down on her, she starts to feel like she's being grilled alive, hot and uncomfortable. But that means Mitchell's plan is working. Now that Gia's front side is warmed up, Mitchell tells her to flip over onto her stomach like a fish being grilled. She feels like she's in a bathhouse, exfoliating under the sun. As she lies there relaxing, Gia can't help but feel relieved that Mitchell is with her. Without him, she would probably be scared and crying. She thanks him, but Mitchell, busy grinding a green substance, is confused. He asks what she's thanking him for, assuming these are Gia's last words before she dies. Annoyed, Gia snaps back, frustrated that Mitchell can't even accept a simple compliment. But Mitchell remains serious, reminding her that it's too early to feel safe. He stands up, holding the freshly ground green substance, determined to use it at all costs. Gia watches him approach, terrified. Fire, he explains, is a heavenly gift to humanity, as dangerous as it is useful. Burns, especially from fire, are among the most painful things humans can experience. But surprisingly, fire isn't the biggest cause of burns. It's the sun. This, Mitchell says, is why Gia needs to apply the green substance to her skin to protect herself from sunburn. Despite his explanation, Gia is still suspicious of the sticky green stuff and doesn't want to use it. Mitchell, undeterred, explains that it's made of seaweed, a common ingredient in skincare products. But Gia covers her ears, refusing to listen to any more of Mitchell's seaweed propaganda. Mitchell won't give up, though. He warns her that direct sunlight causes skin to age prematurely. Gia's life flashes before her eyes as she imagines her skin wrinkling in the sun. Without hesitation, she grabs the seaweed mixture and slathers it on her face. Now, with their perfect skin protected, the crisis is averted. For the moment. Gia and Mitchell begin discussing how to survive on the island. Mitchell suggests they start by making a fire. Gia is confused, thinking water would be the natural first step, but Mitchell explains that even though water is essential, it can be dangerous if it contains bacteria. To stay safe, they'll need to boil it first, which requires a fire. Normally, getting water would be the first step, but since they still have some energy left, it's better to focus on making the fire. Gia admits she doesn't know how to make a fire and assumes they'll have to rub sticks together. But Mitchell has a different plan. He's found a water bottle that washed up on the beach. His plan is to fill it with water and use the bottle to concentrate sunlight onto a specific spot, creating enough heat to start a fire. Mitchell carefully holds the bottle, focusing the sunlight, while Gia works with the stick. She warns Mitchell that he'll be in serious trouble if he burns her hand with the sunlight. Mitchell, concentrating intensely, holds the bottle steady, while Gia vigorously spins the stick on top of the wood. After a few moments of effort, Gia's determined expression practically scares the wood into catching fire. For Mitchell, this is just another day, but Gia is thrilled. She throws her hand out for a high five, and after a moment of consideration, Mitchell gives her one. They stand back to admire the fire they worked so hard to make. However, a new problem arises. Gia is now feeling too hot, and the fire is only making things worse. She tries to cool down by adjusting her dress for ventilation, but it doesn't help. Mitchell, noticing her efforts, quickly looks away and moves to sit farther from her. Gia is confused by Mitchell's sudden distance and asks why he's sitting so far away from her. Naturally, Mitchell quickly changes the subject and points at a seagull flying overhead. He wonders aloud if it has enough protein to help him maintain his gains. Gia, amused, confirms that seagulls are friends of the chicken species. Mitchell then asks if she's ever had bird meat other than chicken and tries to make eye contact with her, but the sight of her is too much for him. He quickly hides his face. Gia notices and asks what's wrong. Mitchell, fumbling for an excuse, claims there's an insect near her, causing Gia to panic. She stands up, frantically trying to brush the non-existent bug away since she hates insects. Mitchell watches, momentarily breathless at how captivating she looks, even in her panic, but he manages to keep his composure. Mitchell then pivots, mentioning the heat and asking if Gia is thirsty. Without waiting for a reply, he sprints off to find water. Gia calls after him, suggesting they go together, but Mitchell insists someone needs to keep the fire alive and delegates the task to her. Gia, without any suspicion, agrees and assumes Mitchell just has a lot of energy. Meanwhile, Mitchell is deep in the forest, leaning against a tree, trying to calm himself down. Every time he looks at Gia, she seems more beautiful, no matter the situation. It's overwhelming, and he can't stop imagining her, his thoughts filled with her at every angle. Desperate to get a hold of himself, Mitchell repeatedly slams his head against the tree, trying to regain focus. He knows he can't continue acting like this around her. Finally, Mitchell takes a deep breath, adjusts his glasses, and decides to pull himself together. He rationalizes that this intense attraction is only temporary, likely caused by the adrenaline rush from their life-or-death situation. With newfound resolve, Mitchell locks in and heads back toward Gia, determined to act normal. Suddenly, Mitchell hears Gia scream and sprints toward her at full speed, ready to save her. When he arrives, he sees Gia backed up against a tree, face to face with a venomous snake. From a documentary she watched, Gia remembers that snakes usually only attack when provoked, so she should be okay if she stays calm, but she can't stand still forever. Thinking quickly, Gia sprints toward the fire. Just as she reaches it, the snake lunges at her. She braces for the worst, but instead of biting her, the snake sinks its fangs into her shirt. At that very moment, Mitchell appears, wearing a makeshift cloth around his arm, which the snake bites instead of Gia. With Gia still in shock, Mitchell swiftly removes the snake, pulls his arm back, and hurls it into the sun with all his strength. Gia can't believe what just happened and is overwhelmed with gratitude for Mitchell saving her. Mitchell grabs her shoulders and frantically asks if she's hurt, if the snake bit her. Gia tries to tell him she's fine, but Mitchell is panicking, talking about needing to perform first aid, seemingly oblivious to her reassurances. Seeing how panicked he is, Gia gives him a light, playful double-handed slap to get his attention. "I'm fine," she insists. "Thank you for saving me." She asks if he's calmed down now, telling him that without his intervention, her life would have been cut short by 10 years from fear alone. But as her adrenaline fades, Gia suddenly becomes aware of Mitchell's lack of clothing. Embarrassed, she asks why he isn't wearing anything. Mitchell explains that it was an emergency, and in situations like this it's best to cover exposed skin with fabric to protect against wild animals. Gia, still a bit flustered, is more annoyed that Mitchell had the foresight to prepare for the situation but didn't include her in those plans. Mitchell tries to laugh it off, but Gia smirks and gives him a hug, thanking him again for saving her life. The gesture catches Mitchell off guard. While Gia feels relief and gratitude, she notices that something seems off with him. Mitchell looks uncomfortable, not his usual composed self. She realizes that maybe he's dealing with something else, something deeper, and wonders if now's the right time to ask. Later, Mitchell approaches Gia in his newly improvised yet classy outfit, beaming with excitement. "I found something amazing," he says, urging her to come check it out. Mitchell has discovered a stream, and Gia's face lights up. Without hesitation, she jumps in, overjoyed at finally having a way to cool off from the scorching heat. As she tries to drink from the stream, Mitchell quickly stops her, pulling out a pot he found and reminding her they need to boil the water first to make it safe. Soon, night falls, and Gia is astounded by everything Mitchell has managed to accomplish in just one day. He set up a makeshift campsite with 10 pieces of styrofoam for the floor, fashioned chairs, and managed to get clean water, all of which gives their camp a surprisingly modern look. Gia, who was initially expecting to live out her primitive survival fantasy by building huts from mud, is amazed. Mitchell interrupts her thoughts, explaining survival tip number 2, use everything you have. He tells her he had originally planned to make their shelter from tree branches, but noticed trash washed up on the beach, which turned out to be extremely useful. He holds out a cup of water he's cleaned thoroughly, explaining that while it may have started as trash, it's now as good as new. Mitchell adds that Gia doesn't have to use it if she feels uncomfortable, but Gia touched by Mitchell's efforts, gratefully accepts it. She drinks the water without hesitation, acknowledging that in their situation, they don't have the luxury of being picky. Seeing how much work Mitchell has put in, Gia feels a wave of guilt for her earlier tantrum. He's been comforting her since they were on the boat, saved her from the snake, and worked tirelessly to make their camp livable, while she hasn't done much to help him in return. She reflects on how scared she had been upon arriving, but everything felt easier because Mitchell was always by her side. As she thanks him for all he's done today, Mitchell blushes, trying to play it off as no big deal. Gia knows better. He's just shy. With a warm smile, she rests her head on his shoulder and reassures him. "We'll make it home alive." As they sit together by the fire, their first night on the island comes to a close, a quiet moment of peace amid the uncertainty of their situation. Gia is wide awake, her heart racing as Mitchell leans in. For a moment it feels like their connection is about to shift to something more intense, but suddenly, Gia's mind drifts back to that intense night in their bedroom. She reflects on their journey, getting married and deciding to have their first official date. They seem to glide over the hurdles of marriage and living together, but now, with dating, they've stumbled. It's not that their relationship has gotten worse, just different. Gia recalls the awkwardness, like the time their hands touched at the gym, and Mitchell immediately apologized. She wonders if married couples often apologize for things as trivial as this. Mitchell sheepishly admits that it's part of the awkwardness that has developed since they started dating. Their relationship is in a metaphorical traffic jam, caught in a confusing, unspoken place. Back in the present, Gia wonders if Mitchell is trying to resolve that traffic jam by making a move now that their survival situation is mostly under control. Is he trying to take the next step in their relationship? Gia feels a rush of excitement, thinking maybe they're going to get wild and free like animals in the wild. She likes this bold side of Mitchell, but also considers pushing him away, unsure if now is the right time. Mitchell, however, is undeterred. He leans in, whispering in Gia's ear, "Be quiet." The thrill of the moment consumes Gia, and Mitchell moves to grab her waist. Gia's heart races, unsure if this is really happening. She tries to stop him, but Mitchell presses a finger to her lips and promises it won't take long. That one simple action snaps something inside Gia. It feels like her heart is going to burst. In the heat of the moment, Gia wonders if she should just stop resisting and give herself over to Mitchell. She finally decides, "I'm okay. I'm ready for everything you're about to do." Mitchell is relieved she's on the same page, and Gia, in her excitement, imagines how she might not be able to walk the next morning. But then Mitchell takes a step back, his tone shifting. He announces, "On the count of 3, we'll rush outside and fight the bears that are approaching our tent." Gia, caught off guard, goes along with it, fully expecting a thrilling moment. But then she realizes what Mitchell really said. When Mitchell counts to 3, they both rush outside, making loud noises by yelling and banging random objects together. The bears, clearly startled by the noise, take one look at Mitchell and flee as fast as they can. Exhausted, Mitchell turns to Gia and asks if she's okay. Gia, standing there in stunned silence, feels a sense of disappointment. She had expected something far different, but of course, this was Mitchell.